All right, everybody. Today is looking at what is a psychologist and what they actually kind of look like. Because you have all these different disciplines within psychology. And what is going to happen is because you have so many different kinds of disciplines, those are going to kind of manifest, for lack of a better term, in certain kinds of jobs. So, for example, a psychoanalyst will lean towards one kind of position. A behavioral psychologist will lean towards another kind of position. And this is kind of a short list of the different kinds of psychologists that can exist. This is by no means an exhaustive and totally comprehensive list, but this is enough to hit kind of like the major high points and the major types of positions that are there. So the first thing that I kind of need to do though is dispel kind of a common thought out there. A psychologist is the same as a psychiatrist. No, they're not. A psychologist is just someone who studies the mind and the behavior of humans and animals. A psychiatrist is an actual medical doctor. So often what happens is a psychiatrist, well, if you're going to be a psychiatrist, you got to go through medical school and everything else, and then you specialize in psychiatry. A psychologist is not a medical doctor. A psychiatrist can actually give prescriptions for medications and those types of things. A psychologist cannot give you a prescription for medications because they're not a medical doctor. Um, and remember, those are very, very different things. Now, a psychiatrist will refer to psychology to help them in their practice, but those are that's the main dividing line between the two. Psychiatry, you're a medical doctor. A psychologist, you are not a medical doctor. So the first type of psychologist, and this is perhaps the most common, especially when people think of psychologists, is what we would call a clinical psychologist. They are the people that help others deal with their personal problems. Can be found in private hospitals, can be found in mental hospitals, found in prisons, found in clinics. Um, Often they will specialize in tests to determine what kind of treatment a person may need. So they can work with a psychiatrist, and it's actually good that if they do. But the main thing is, again, they just help people deal with something. So, like for example, when I worked as a teacher, um, but even when I was teaching, I actually taught in a jail, maximum security juvenile lockdown, and I was technically the middle school teacher, and even though I taught grades 4 through 10, so the youngest I had was in fourth grade. He was locked up for attempted murder. But long story with that. But one of the things that the psychologist on the facility that worked at the facility would try to do is try to help them come to terms with some of the, quite frankly, those personality issues that were drawing him into conflict with the rest of society. And that's just one example, but it can be, anything where people are dealing with anxiety, people are dealing with depression, people are dealing with, you name it. They can go to a clinical psychologist and try to get some help with that. They just can't get the drugs. But these types of psychologists, what they can do is they can kind of dabbling in a little bit of behaviorism and cognitive psychology. They can try to help equip the patient with tools to deal with those feelings and thoughts and so forth. Counseling psychologists, these they're very, very close to a clinical psychologist. But whereas a clinical psychologist is more of a kind of like a long-term thing, counseling psychologists can be like a one and done thing, um, but usually not. But what they do is, they're found in schools, pretty much industrial firms, private practices, and they kind of help with people deal with kind of like everyday things. Sometimes even just a process, everyday issues. Like for example, the school counselors. This is what ultimately they're supposed to do. It's like their primary job. Now they get a bunch of other things added to their plate, but really this is what a school counselor is really there for. If someone is having some kind of issue, and again, doesn't have to be life or death, or even things like, dealing with things like depression, doesn't have to be stuff like that. It's just they just need a sounding board, someone to help process, um, so that way they can make an informed decision. But yeah, they just kind of help people deal with day-to-day stuff, and again, not necessarily as glamorous, but again, can be very, very important to some people. Developmental psychologists, these are people that they study how people change physically, emotionally, cognitively, socially as they go through the different stages of life. So they can study children, they can study all the way to the elderly. There are some psychologists who even study kind of the process of dying. What does a person kind of go through? What are their thought processes as they, near the end? But but again, they can study how children develop, they can study how teenagers develop, what separates somebody that's, graduating high school from someone that is graduating middle school and they're about to go to high school. What is changing when somebody that graduates high school to someone who's about to get married? Someone that's about to retire versus someone that is jumping into the workforce for the first time, and how these different changes and how these different life stages influence how we develop as people. Again, this is a very, very wide field where you can study almost anything, but you can, again, this is a wide field. Educational psychologists, these people are usually found in schools and or school related institutions. They focus on the children and very young, and they develop tests to kind of study things like intelligence, memory, problem solving, help understand motivation, evaluate teaching methods. Often, educational psychologists will, they'll release something, or they will, talk about something that impacts how I do my job as a public educator. But yeah, they'll evaluate the teaching methods, devise new tests, create new instructional tools, sometimes even devices. How do you help somebody that, like for example, you have a student and, maybe they're a mute. They're not able to talk. What instructional tool can be created or provided to help that student be successful? Um, somebody who's blind, somebody who's dealing with autism, someone that's schizophrenic, someone that has some sort of developmental issue or, mental issue. Um, what can be done? What tools can be instituted or created to help that student be successful? Community psychologists, these are usually found in mental health, social welfare agencies, and they can help create, run, design a mental health facility. So something where that I had a student years ago, years ago. Um, they actually had to be institutionalized. What does it mean for someone to be institutionalized? Why was he institutionalized? When he was institutionalized, what was in place to try to help him pretty much learn how to be successful? Um, it was a long, complicated story with that one, but this is kind of what a community psychologist does. A lot of people that are psychologists who work with CPS, Child Protective Services, APS, Adult Protective Services. Um, those are the types of institutions that these types of psychologists can be found. Industrial and organizational psychologists. These are usually your psychologists who work with big companies. Um, for example, my mom, back when Compaq was still around, a good over 10 years ago, they had a psychologist on at the facility, and what they did was they studied how people how to help the employees be more productive. So found ways to boost the production. What can we do? Um, Find ways to improve working conditions mainly, train people, reduce accidents, help with if somebody's having an issue with another coworker. Often these are found in kind of the human resources and HR departments. Um, and really their main push is to help someone be successful on the job. And it can be as mild as you just come in and vent about something. It can be they develop a training program to deal with some sort of issue that's going on within the company. Um, it can even be something, if it's a huge company, it may even be something where they'll be like, well, you know what, let's change the lighting in the company, in the building. Actually swap out the light bulbs, change the change it to something that's less kind of harsh on the senses, or hey, maybe every Friday we do something to you know bring donuts, improve the morale, make people happy to come to work, or that kind of stuff. And then these are kind of the last kind of ones that I'm going to go over. You have your environmental psychologists. These are psychologists that study the environment and how that environment can affect people. Good, bad, and different. It's going to be like home life. It can be in a community. It can be on the job. Sky's the limit. A psychobiologist. These study, in general, the effects of drugs or try to describe some sort of behavior or thought process biologically. Um, every now and then you'll see you'll hear it on the radio or something, or see a commercial where they'll be doing some sort of drug study. Um, there's this new antidepressant or this new anti-anxiety medication, or even something like something to combat cancer. They can actually get a psychobiologist to work in even that kind of situation because again, when you're taking any kind of medications, and we will actually get to this when we do talk about drugs and the body and stuff. What you're doing when you take any kind of drug, even if it's an aspirin, you are affecting someone's body, their biology. You're changing their biology, and a psychobiologist can be on hand, even for a cancer study, to see if there are some unintended side effects for a cancer treatment or something. They can, they don't have to, but again, it can be something where it's like, okay, well, we're doing an antidepressant study. Here's this new drug. Um, they can be on hand to kind of long-term track and monitor how those drugs are affecting the anxiety. Is it making it better? Is it making it worse? Is it leading to some other things? And then a health psychologist. What they do is they study the link between pretty much your physiological and your psychological health factors. Because again, your mind and your body are separate, but they're very, very intertwined with each other. One will affect the other. And they can look at things like stress, for example. If you are very, very stressed out about something, that will lead to physical changes within your body. So, so yeah, if you're like hyper stressed, you may have problems eating. You may have, intestinal issues, like a lot of diarrhea or that kind of stuff. And a health psychologist will look at that kind of connection. And kind of the next step will be to try to help the patient or the client to kind of alleviate those symptoms. And they can, again, go to the hat of the kind of clinical or counseling psychologist, where they'll try to show them techniques, breathing techniques, thought pattern techniques, those types of things, in order to help someone kind of deal with that. And that's really, again, this is the short list of the different kinds of psychologists that are out there. And again, these are kind of purists, for lack of a better term, but a psychologist can kind of wear multiple hats. They can be a clinical and a health psychologist at the same time. You're not just totally pigeonholed into one. It just depends on the situation. Where are you? Where do you work? That kind of stuff. So, but yeah, this is kind of my Mr. Day's short list of the different kinds of psychologists that are out there. And I will see you guys next time. Peace out.